Antimicrobial resistance is without a doubt one of the biggest fights we're facing in modern medicine. Superbugs are just evolving defenses way faster than we can come up with new drugs. But what if the problem isn't just the drugs, but the type of drug? What if we've been trying to pick a lock with the wrong kind of key all along? Well, let's dive into a brand new weapon in this fight, a really clever molecule called Cresomycin.
And that, right there, is the big idea behind this whole breakthrough. Just imagine for a second that a bacterium has jammed its most critical lock, maybe with a tiny piece of chewing gum. Now, if you come at it with a flimsy, wiggling key, it's just going to bend and fail, right? But what if you had a key that was perfectly rigid, pre-cut to the exact right shape? It could just push right past that blockage and turn the mechanism. That's exactly the story we're going to explore.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First up, we'll look at the Superbugs molecular shield, how it protects itself. Then we'll see why our old, flexible keys, our drugs, keep failing. After that, we'll meet our new, rigid key, Cresomycin, and really get into the science of what makes it so powerful. And finally, we'll look at the proof, the evidence that this new strategy actually works.
All right, so to really get a grip on this, we first have to understand the enemy's playbook. And when it comes to bacteria, their defense is this incredibly elegant and honestly, frustratingly effective molecular wall.
So the main battleground, where this all goes down, is the bacterial ribosome, specifically a big piece of it called the 50S subunit. Now you can just think of the ribosome as the cell's protein factory. It's essential. If you can shut down that factory, the bacterium can't build anything it needs and it dies. Simple as that. And a lot of our best antibiotics, like macrolides and lincosamides, they're designed to do just that, to jam the factory right at its most important station, the peptidyltransferase center.
So how do the bacteria fight back? Well, they've evolved this brilliant little trick called ribosomal methylation. They have a gene, it's called the gene, that makes an enzyme. And this enzyme's only job is to stick a tiny little molecule, a single methyl group, right onto the ribosome, exactly in the antibiotic's landing zone. It's like a tiny molecular shield.
And the effect of this one tiny little change is, well, it's huge. In chemistry, we call it steric hindrance. But forget the jargon, all it really means is that it creates a physical bump, a roadblock. At this one specific spot, A2058, this methyl group just sits there. And for a lot of our best drugs, that tiny little bump is totally impassable.
And this brings us right to the heart of the problem with our current arsenal. That tiny little bump is literally all it takes to defeat some of our most powerful medicines. Let's dig into why.
The problem, it turns out, is baked right into their design. Most of our traditional antibiotics are, well, they're structurally floppy. At the molecular level, they're not sitting still. They're constantly wiggling, twisting, and changing their shape. They don't have one single fixed structure.
And this all comes down to a little bit of physics. You see, when that floppy drug molecule is just floating around, it's in a state of high disorder or high entropy, all that wiggling. But to bind to the ribosome and do its job, it has to stop wiggling and freeze into one very specific shape, a state of low entropy. And making that change costs energy. It's a tax, a hidden cost, called the entropic penalty, that the drug has to pay just to get into position. And this is where it all goes wrong, step by step. The floppy drug gets close to the ribosome. It starts paying that energy tax, trying to freeze itself into the right shape. But then, bam, it collides with that methyl bump we talked about. And now the total energy cost to hold its shape and deal with the bump is just too high. The binding fails, the drug gets repelled, and the bacteria just keeps on living.
So if the floppy key fails, the solution seems kind of obvious, right? Build a rigid one. And that brings us to a molecule that was purpose-built from the ground up to solve this exact problem, Cresomycin.
Let's meet our hero. Cresomycin is a totally new kind of weapon. It's fully synthetic, designed by chemists at Harvard. And while it took some inspiration from older drugs, its key feature is an absolute game changer. Its structure isn't floppy at all. It has been chemically locked into its perfect, active, battle-ready shape.
Now look at the difference here. Let's run that same playback, but with Cresomycin. It's a whole different story. The rigid molecule approaches the ribosome. And here's the key. It's already in the perfect shape. It's pre-organized, so there's no energy cost. It just slides right into the binding site, and it locks on with such immense force, such high affinity, that the little methyl bump just doesn't have the strength to push it away. It basically plows right past the bacteria's defense.
This principle is the secret sauce behind Cresomycin's power. It's called conformational pre-organization, and you know what?
It is an incredibly elegant solution to that energy problem we were just talking about.
I mean, just listen to this quote. It absolutely nails it. The genius of this design is that all the hard work is done ahead of time, in the lab. The molecule is literally built in its final perfect shape. It doesn't have to waste a single bit of energy trying to contort itself once it's inside the bacteria.
So here it is, the side-by-side comparison. The old, floppy drugs pay that high-energy tax, which means their binding power, their affinity, is weaker, especially against resistant bacteria. But Cresomycin? It pays no entropic penalty. All of its energy goes directly into binding, which gives it this incredibly high affinity that's strong enough to just power through the resistance. Honestly, it's like the difference between trying to stick a piece of wet spaghetti to a wall versus using a piece of superglue. No contest.
Okay, so the theory sounds amazing, right? It's elegant, it makes perfect sense. But the million-dollar question is, does it actually work in the real world, against the toughest bugs out there? Let's take a look at the evidence.
And the answer, you'll be glad to hear, is a resounding yes. Cresomycin has shown serious power against a group of superbugs that doctors call the escape pathogens. That stands for Enterococcus, Staph, Klebsiella, Acinetobacter, Pseudomonas, and Enterobacter. This is basically the public enemy #1 list for infectious disease specialists. These are the bacteria that cause the most dangerous hospital-acquired infections and are masters of drug resistance.
And the hit list is seriously impressive. We're talking about MRSA, the infamous staph infection. We're talking about strains of staph that are even resistant to vancomycin, which is supposed to be our last line of defense. It also defeats VRE and multi-drug-resistant pneumococcus. These are some of the baddest bugs on the planet.
But for me, this is the most powerful piece of evidence. They put it to the test in a head-to-head trial in mice. The mice had sepsis, a deadly blood infection, caused by a multi-drug-resistant bacteria. The group treated with a standard powerful antibiotic, vancomycin, failed. The infections won. But the group treated with Cresomycin, they were cured. I mean, that's an absolutely incredible demonstration of its potential in a living system.
So all of this leaves us with a really fascinating big-picture question. The success of Cresomycin isn't just about one new drug. It's about a whole new strategy. Is this idea, designing rigid, pre-organized molecules, is that the blueprint we've been looking for? Could this be the key to finally designing a new generation of antibiotics that can actually stay one step ahead of bacterial evolution? Only time will tell for sure, but it is for sure one of the most exciting and promising strategies we've seen in a very long time.